Imagine you walk into a room and see a single sentence glowing on a screen. This sentence is false. You read it once. You read it again. If it's true, then it's false. But if it's false, then it must be true. Your brain does a little somersault, and for a second you're not sure if logic is broken, or you are. That little brain glitch has a name, the liar's paradox. And once you really look at it, it starts to feel less like a cute puzzle and more like a tiny crack in the way you think about truth itself. You've dealt with lying your whole life. You've probably said, "Are you lying to me?" to a friend or a sibling, or at least thought it during a very suspicious group chat explanation. Usually, a lie is simple. Either someone is telling the truth or they're making stuff up. End of story. But then you meet a sentence that lies about itself. It's like a person saying, "Everything I say is a lie." If that's true, it's a lie. If it's a lie, then it's actually true. Suddenly your usual true or false mental switch doesn't seem to work anymore. That's the strange world of the liar's paradox, where language spins in circles and refuses to land. In this video, we're really asking one big question. What does the liar's paradox actually mean for the way you think about truth, logic, and even reality? Along the way, you'll bump into self-referential statements, sentences that point back at themselves like a selfie camera, and truth value loops, little mental circuits where your brain keeps flipping between true and false forever. We'll play with some liar paradox examples, but more importantly, we'll try to understand what they're trying to tell you. Let's turn the liar's paradox into something you can literally picture. Imagine a cardboard box on your table. On top of the box is a big label that says, "The sentence on this label is false." That's it. No hidden letters, no trick ink, just that one sentence staring back at you. You pick up the box and try to decide, is the label telling the truth or is it lying? If you say, "Okay, the label is telling the truth," then what it says must be accurate, so the sentence on the label is false. But if it's false, then the label wasn't telling the truth after all. On the other hand, if you say, "Fine, the label is lying, the sentence is not false," then it must be true, which means it is false again. This silly little box is just a physical version of the liar's paradox. The label is a self-referential statement that talks about itself, and your brain gets stuck in a tiny loop while it tries to assign it a normal truth value. Let's walk through the box slowly, like you're debugging a glitchy app. Step 1. You look at the label and make a guess. Suppose you start with, "All right, I believe you. The sentence on this label is false." If that's your starting point, then the sentence, "The sentence on this label is false," is true. But hold on, what does it say? It says it's false. So if it's true, then it's false. That's like saying, "It's true that this is false." Your brain does a little double take. Okay, rewind. Step 2. You flip your guess. "Nope, you're lying. The sentence on this label is not false. It's true." Now what? If the sentence is true, then it correctly describes itself as false, which means it's false again. You've just created a mini roller coaster in your head. True, false, true, false. There's no stable place to stop. This is what happens with self-referential statements that say something about their own truth. They trap you in what you could call truth value loop. You try true and get kicked to false. You try false and get kicked back to true. It's like trying to sit on a chair that vanishes every time you're about to land. In most of life, yes or no questions are comforting. Did you eat the last slice of pizza? Someone says yes, or they say no, and worst case, you argue for a bit. But with this box, you can argue with yourself forever. There's no answer that doesn't immediately undo itself. On the bright side, at least the box isn't also texting you at 2 a.m. saying, "We need to talk." That would be a whole different paradox. So far, you've got one box, one label, one impossible sentence. Weird, but manageable. Now let's make it a little more chaotic. Imagine two boxes, box A and box B, sitting side by side. Box A's label says, "The sentence on box B is true." Box B's label says, "The sentence on box A is false." You know what's coming. You try to be clever. Suppose box A is telling the truth. That would mean box B's label is true. But box B says, "The sentence on box A is false." So if B is telling the truth, then A is false. But you started by assuming A is true. Contradiction. Fine. New attempt. Suppose box A is lying. Its sentence is false. Then box B's sentence is not true. So B is lying. But if box B is lying, then the sentence on box A is false, which means the sentence on box A is actually true. Now you've decided both are lying and telling the truth at the same time. Your neat mental picture from the first part, where a sentence is either true or false, just shattered. By adding one more label and a second box, you've created a little ecosystem of paradox. The labels are still just liar paradox examples, but now they're ganging up on you. And this is the twist. The problem isn't just one sentence. It's the way certain structures of sentences, especially self-referential ones, collide with our basic idea that every statement must be either true or false. Your intuition about truth starts to wobble a bit. On the plus side, if your brain feels slightly fried right now, congratulations, you're doing philosophy correctly. At this point, you might be wondering, okay, but what do the smart people say? Logicians and philosophers have actually spent centuries wrestling with the liar's paradox, and they don't all agree on what's going on. One camp says, the problem is us. We're trying to force every sentence into a true or false box, but some sentences just don't belong there. According to this view, the liar's sentence, "This sentence is false," has no truth value at all. It's like asking, what color is the number 5? The question feels grammatical, but it doesn't really make sense. In this approach, self-referential statements about their own truth are treated with suspicion. They're labeled out of bounds, and the paradox disappears because you're no longer allowed to even ask if they're true or false. Another camp takes a different path and says, maybe we don't need to choose. They explore logics where a statement can be both true and false at the same time. That sounds wild, but mathematically, you can build systems like that. In those systems, truth-value loops aren't bugs. They're allowed behaviors. The liar sentence doesn't break the rules. It just reveals that our everyday rules were overly strict. Yet another approach says, the trick is in the language. Instead of treating all statements as if they're on the same level, you divide them into layers. Some sentences talk about the world. The sky is blue. And higher-level sentences talk about other sentences. The sky is blue is true. In these hierarchical views, liar paradox examples are like someone sneaking between levels where they don't belong, creating a glitch. So depending on who you ask, the liar's paradox is either meaningless, both true and false, or a sign that we need more careful layers in our language. Same puzzle, very different stories about what it's really showing you. Let's zoom out for a second and breathe. What's the heart of all this? Here's the core. The liar's paradox is what happens when a statement talks about its own truth in just the right, or wrong, way, creating a self-referential loop that can't be consistently labeled true or false. Every time you try to pin it down, it squirms out of your grip. Why should you care? Because your brain loves the rule. Every statement is either true or false. It's a simple, comforting rule. But the liar's paradox shows that this rule doesn't always hold, at least not without some careful extra structure. And once you see that, you start to wonder, where else in your thinking are you assuming simplicity that isn't really there? If you wanted a couple of snack-sized lines to tell a friend, you could say, "Some sentences are like mirrors pointed at themselves. When they talk about their own truth, they break the usual rule." Or, "The liar's paradox is a sentence that short-circuits the question, 'Is this true?' and keeps your brain in an endless loop." Now let's take this into a slightly more sci-fi direction and see how weird it can get. Imagine there's a perfect truth machine in front of you. You say a sentence into it, and it instantly lights up green for true or red for false. No mistakes, no delays. Science, magic, whatever, just trust that it works. There's one catch. If you feed it a sentence that doesn't have a clear truth value, it overheats and explodes. You, being curious and hopefully standing at a safe distance, decide to test it. You start simple. 2 plus 2 equals 4. The machine glows green. Nice. Then, "I have wings." It glows red. Also fair. Now you get bold. You lean in and say, "This sentence is false." If the machine says green, it's calling the sentence true. But if it's true, then it's false. So green is wrong. If it says red, it's false, which means it's true. So red is wrong. The truth machine is stuck in one of those truth value loops. It can't assign true or false without contradicting itself. The only option left is the third one. Boom. You've just weaponized self-referential statements. This thought experiment shows why liar paradox examples aren't just silly word games. They expose situations where any system, whether it's a human brain, a logical theory, or a hypothetical truth machine, runs into trouble when it tries to answer questions it was never designed to handle. And honestly, if a sentence can blow up your imaginary perfect truth detector, you have to admit, that's kind of impressive. Weird, but impressive. So what does all this say about you and your life? Beyond the fun of breaking hypothetical machines, the liar's paradox sits on the border between logic and self-awareness. It's a tiny reminder that whenever something points back at itself, whether it's a sentence, a belief, or even an identity, the rules get complicated. Think about the things you tell yourself. "I'm always lying to myself." Or, "I can never trust my own judgment." These are a bit like emotional self-referential statements. If you truly believe, "I can never trust my own judgment," then how can you trust your judgment about that belief itself? You end up in a softer, human version of a truth-value loop. You doubt your doubt, you question your questions, and your mind chases its own tail. Understanding the structure behind the liar's paradox can give you a strange kind of comfort. It shows that some mental knots aren't there because you're broken. They're there because language and self-reference are genuinely tricky. Some questions about yourself might not have a clean, true, or false answer, and that's okay. On a bigger scale, the paradox hints at the limits of system. Mathematics, computer programs, legal codes, moral rules. Whenever they start talking about themselves, they can run into similar problems. That's why people still study self-referential statements and liar paradox examples in logic, computer science, and philosophy. They reveal the edges of what our systems can cleanly describe. In a strange way, the liar's paradox can make you feel both small and big at the same time. Small because reality is more subtle than your favorite simple rules, and big because your mind is capable of even noticing that. Let's gently walk back through where you've been. You started with a puzzling sentence. "This sentence is false," and turned it into a box with a label that just wouldn't sit still as true or false. You saw how self-referential statements about their own truth can create endless truth-value loops where every answer cancels itself out. Then you raised the stakes with two boxes arguing about each other. Saw how different thinkers explain the liar's paradox. Some saying it's meaningless, some saying it's both true and false, and some reorganizing language into layers to keep things safe. You tested a hypothetical truth machine, until it exploded under the pressure of a paradox. And finally, you connected all of that to your own life. How loops in language echo loops in self-doubt and self-description. If you walk away with just a few takeaways, let them be these. First, not every sentence deserves a true or false stamp. Some are built to break that system. Second, self-reference, things pointing back at themselves, is powerful and dangerous. It can create beautiful ideas and impossible puzzles. Third, when you hit a mental loop that feels unsolvable, it might not be because you're failing. It might be because the question itself is tangled. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for your brain is to say, "This one doesn't fit into a simple box," and let it rest. In the end, the liar's paradox is a tiny sentence with a big attitude. It stands in the middle of your neat, orderly world of true and false, and just refuses to pick a side. And somehow, that little act of rebellion opens a doorway into some of the deepest questions about logic, language, and how you understand yourself. Next time you catch your thoughts spiraling, doubting your doubt, or judging your own judgments, you might remember that some loops are baked into the structure of thinking itself. You're not the only one who gets stuck. Even logic does. And weirdly, that can be kind of reassuring. If this made your brain pleasantly uncomfortable, try sharing one of these paradoxes with a friend and see how their brain reacts. Or keep exploring. There are more puzzles like this that poke at infinity, free will, and identity. For now, thanks for hanging out with this little logical troublemaker. Keep asking questions, even the ones that loop back on themselves. Especially those